Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. Today I would like to tell you about a novel that was recommended to me by my friend Lucy. So Lucy, if you're watching this video, thank you so much for recommending this excellent book to me. I have to say that I had never read anything by Mieko Kawakami before, but at one point I did start to read the Spanish translation of Breasts and Eggs, but I abandoned that reading experience that time. I think it was just not the right moment for me, and I thought, well, someday I can pick it up again. Now I have read Heaven, which is her first novel, and I'm not going to say that I enjoyed this novel because I think that, strictly speaking, this is one of those texts that you do not really enjoy reading, but it is a really powerful experience, or at least it was to me, and I think that I'm going to be remembering this novel for a very long time. So I think in that sense you could say that I quote-unquote enjoyed the reading experience with this novel. So let me tell you a little bit about what I found here. Heaven was originally published in 2009, and the title in Japanese is the same as the title in English. It's a very brief novel. We are looking at 175 pages, 9 chapters, and the main topic of the novel is bullying. So that is one of the reasons why I told you before that I did not really enjoy this text. The action is set in the year 1991, and we have a protagonist narrator whom we know by the name of Ice. Ice as in ice. That's not his real name, of course, but that is what other people, especially his bullies, call him because he has a lazy eye, so they identify him with that. Other characters that we meet in this novel are Kojima, a female classmate of Ice, who is also bullied. And then we hear primarily about two of the bullies. One of them is called Ninomiya, and the other one is called Momose. So those are the main characters. We hear sometimes a little bit about the parents, but very, very little. It is for the most part focusing on these, and primarily because we have a protagonist narrator on Ice himself. So the story begins one day when Ice opens his pencil case and he finds inside the pencil case a note that says, "We should be friends." So this is a note from Kojima, who is bullied because she looks dirty and disheveled. There are reasons for that we find when we read the novel, but that is the way that everybody else perceives her. So Ice and Kojima, they just bond and they become friends because they are united by this misfortune of being bullied. So they meet outside of school and they hang out, they just talk for the most part and walk and spend time at parks and places like that. And at one point Kojima says that she wants to show Ice quote-unquote heaven, so he is definitely intrigued by that. That happens towards the beginning of the novel, so it's not a revelation or anything like that, but it is a very important part of the story. Now the title, Heaven, is in sharp contrast to the reality that Ice and Kojima basically experience on a daily basis, because their lives, I would describe them truly as a living hell. Heaven is just an unflinching look at the disturbing reality of bullying, and there are plenty of passages here that you're going to find very, very tough to read. At least that was my experience. There were parts where I was like, okay, I need to put the book down a little bit and focus on something else, and maybe I can come back to it a little bit later, because the violence that Ice and Kojima are subjected to is just, brutal. Just because they're different, right? And it's just a brutal type of violence. When I was a child, I experienced bullying myself, but it was never to this extent. It was never this violent and never this systematic. That's the word that I'm going to use here. So Ice and Kojima experience moments of dissociation even because of the bullying. At one point he speaks of the desire to be a thing so that he would be unnoticed or not given enough importance. And in another sense, they realize also that maybe that is what the bullying is doing to them, turning them into things in the eyes of the people who are carrying out the bullying. Now, the novel does not really offer us explanations for bullying. One of those explanations that is like, okay, this is why bullying happens, these are the reasons behind it. It doesn't really try to find the logic behind the bullying, because that would be very simplistic. One of the things that are emphasized in the novel is precisely the lack of logic behind all of this, the lack of a rationale. And we actually don't really know that much about the bullies, because Kawakami decides to focus on the experience of the victim in this case. We are not told, for example, if the bullies come from broken homes, if they were abused themselves, things like that, that would maybe in a way explain why this kind of thing happens. So that is left really outside of the narrative in this case. What is emphasized is just the senselessness of the violence. Chapter 6 is a really important one when it comes to this issue, precisely because at that point in the story, Ice actually confronts one of the bullies, the guy by the name of Momose that I was telling you about before. So he talks to him, he begins to ask him, why are you guys doing this to me, right? Why is this happening? Is it my eye, because I look different, and all of that kind of stuff? But it turns out that Momose is just totally amoral, and he admits even that he doesn't even get anything out of the bullying. He's not even enjoying it or anything like that. This guy is completely cold. I'm gonna read you his reply when Ice asks for some kind of explanation behind all this. And Momose says, "Your eyes are messed up, so everyone calls you Ice. That's true, but it's just a coincidence. Your eyes have nothing to do with what happens at school. That's not why you get bullied. There's no reason it has to be you. It could have been anyone. But you happened to be there, and we happened to all be in a certain mood, so things went the way they did." And then later on in the following page, this is page 121, 122, he says, let me see, "There are these, I don't know, tendencies. Sometimes you just want to do something. You get these like urges, like you want to punch someone or kick someone, whoever happens to be there. The only reason those things happen to you is that you were around when someone was looking for someone to punch. That's all." So you can hear the brutality even in the language, even in the way that these things are expressed. It's almost like an instinctive thing for him. There seems to be no rationale, no moral compass involved, no principles whatsoever. So what Kawakami is emphasizing here is the banality of evil. I'm going to borrow that term from Hannah Arendt, okay? With the aggravating factor here in the particular case of Heaven, that there is no higher authority ordering for the violence to be carried out, but it's just something that seems to be impulsive, something that seems to be instinctive for these characters who really have no principles. So Heaven, if we're going to look at the main theme right here, I would say is ultimately about the difficulties that are faced by those people who are outcasts, who are perceived to be different by others, and they are made to suffer because of those differences, because they depart from the norm, if you will. And that may be intentional or not. Okay, for example, in the case of Kojima, she chooses to look the way that she looks. In the case of Ice, he was born with that lazy eye. So, as I said, intentionally or unintentionally, they depart from the norm and they are made to suffer because of that. Now, personally, as someone who tends not to fit in, I had no trouble at all identifying with these characters, with Ice and with Kojima, even though, as I suggested before, I have never experienced anything even close to what they go through in the novel. But I think if you look at the title of the novel, Heaven, which is a title that the author chose to have in English in the original edition of the text, I think it's about that longing that many of us have for a place or a state in which everything makes sense, in which everything is at rest. So in other words, the longing that is behind the story that we read is the longing for peace. So the bottom line here is that I believe that Heaven is just a heartbreaking read. That's what it was for me, but I think it's a necessary read. The action takes place in Japan, but unfortunately, as in many other cases with books that I have told you about in the past, I think we could say that this is a universal story, because the bullying, the main theme or the main topic that we have here behind the narrative, is unfortunately a universal reality. Now, some readers are probably going to wish that Kawakami had gone a little bit more into detail as to why bullying happens, or maybe a little bit more in depth into the psychology of the bully. So that's something maybe that some people would find maybe lacking in this novel. But I think she chooses to focus on the effects of the bullying on the victims, and that is very well done. So if you judge the book by what is there as opposed to judging it by what is not there, I think this is definitely an excellent book. And I do want to read more by Mieko Kawakami now. I have already ordered from my library her novella Miss Ice Cream Sandwich, so that one is on the way. And I'm also going to go and pick up once again that Spanish translation of Breasts and Eggs, Pechos y Huevos, as it is titled in Spanish. That I went to the library the other day and they had the copy still there, so I think I can just go and pick it up, and I'm definitely going to check it out. And I also wanted to tell you, if you're interested in this topic, I have just seen, this happened by pure chance, if such a thing as pure chance exists, I have just seen an anime that deals with the topic of bullying from a very different perspective and with a very different story. But this is a modern classic that I recommend to you if you are into anime, and that is of course Silent Voice, the movie. This was a manga originally. I do want to check out the manga, just to have more of an appreciation of the story itself. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Those were my 2 cents on Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.